Okay, so I thought we would look at Robert Creeley's The Language today. That's in the article that you're reading for your assigned reading, and I will just share our screen here. And I also would like to have us listen to him actually read the language. So unfortunately, this video starts in the middle of the video, but we will listen to him read and look at the poem at the same time.
Way with Olson's. The language. Locate I love you somewhere in teeth and eyes. Bite it, but take care not to hurt. You want so much, so little. Words say everything. I love you again. Then what is emptiness for? To fill. I heard words and words full of holes, aching. Speech is a mouth. I mean, I'm not pretentiously saying to you, and therefore the heavens opened and the rivers flew. But what's fascinating to me is what's discovered in writing. I mean, there's no way, I think, that I could have come to that information except through this situation of revelation that poetry effectually involves for me. Now, let me do. I said this was to be in some ways a personal note, and this is what I meant, I think, by that I can't discover for you any more than I can for myself the particular means by which any of this possibility occurs, nor can I even claim it. The lovely thing about this situation is that nobody, literally nobody can own it. It's again like Olson's sense of the relation of poetry and magic, that poets very possibly have that situation called foresight, or ability to anticipate and or perceive and or to intuit.
Okay, so I just want to look a little more closely at this poem, partly because one of the first things we're thinking about is lineation and why a poet might break a line in one place rather than another. So you got to hear him read these very short lines, which create a sort of staccato rhythm. The longer lines are going to give you more of that nostalgic sort of yearning feeling of a slowness, right? Whereas the shorter lines are going to give you a much more staccato kind of rhythm. And poets are always, like musicians, thinking about rhythm. And their lines and that rhythm is going to reflect in some way the content of the poem. So there's something very that sort of grabs you, right, in this. And you're not quite sure, it dislocates you a little bit, even though he begins with this word locate. It dislocates you a little because you're not expecting grammatically what happens to happen. So locate I, and that I is emphasized with the italics. And then we get the verb love you, right? But first, because it's broken where it is, if it just read locate I love you, you would get a full sentence, right? And that would not surprise you so much. That would be much more expected. But when you get that locate I, for a second you hesitate, and you're being told this is an imperative, right? It's a command. So you're being told to locate the I, to maybe locate the speaker of the poem. And then you get this verb. So there's something about that love you and the locating the I that actually meshes together in a way that it wouldn't if this were a line written all the way across. In other words, you're first told to locate I, locate the speaker's identity perhaps, and then told to locate the love that the speaker has for you, the reader, or maybe this is a you addressed to someone he or she loves. Okay, we don't know that the speaker is the author. That's usually what we assume when we're writing about poetry, but that's not a given. But anyway, just notice how because of where the line is broken, we get a certain kind of instability, and question, and also a different interpretation in that first line than we get when we put it together with that second line. And love you some where. Okay, so that some, love you some, love you just a little bit, but then somewhere in, and ending with that preposition again. It assumes that there's a noun at the end of that, but we don't have that noun yet. So somewhere in teeth and eyes bite. Now that is weird, right? Eyes bite. Now there's a comma separating it, so it's not that the eyes, the noun is connected to the verb in that the eyes are biting. However, that's how it's going to sound um, in our heads, right? So it is meaning one thing, but it's also hinting at another. It's alluding at another. So there's something violent here a little bit. And then bite it. But take care not to hurt you. Okay, so that take care not, again, these lines are setting you up and you don't know what the next line is going to bring. So it's creating this sort of surprise, a suspense. And that's what the best poets do with their lineation. And it's something you cannot do in writing prose, right? Prose is anything that is not poetry. It's anything that's not written with this sort of line break in mind. So as soon as you take prose and you start breaking it up, whether you break it up well or badly, you are breaking it into poetry. You're giving it some sort of rhythm. Now, again, just because you break it up some lines of prose doesn't mean that you're creating good poetry, because you do need to think about why you're breaking a line where you do. Take care not to hurt you want. So again, we get that hurt you, right? So in here, there's just, it's toggling between sort of love and violence all the way along. So much, so little. And this contrast, right, of feeling here. So do we want it so much? Do we want it so little? And I think it's replicating that feeling of passion, of love, of not quite knowing where we stand, of not being able to identify ourselves anymore when we're in love, right? We kind of lose that sense of identity. And then words say everything. Love you again. Then what is emptiness for? To fill. I heard words and words full of holes. And again, so words are full, but then of holes, it just contrasts what he's come to say, right? So he says words full, but then when we get that of holes, we get the opposite of being full. Aching speech is a mouth. Okay. I want to look a little bit at this last one. Speech is a mouth. So we're taking something that is usually associated with a verb, right? Speech. And we're making it into the thing that gives that speech. So it is a mouth. So this is a metaphor, right? Speech is a mouth. When we take something and we turn it into something else, that is creating metaphor. So if we say speech is like a mouth, we would have a simile. But here we have a metaphor. And the reason to create a metaphor is that you give more dimension to a thing, right? As soon as speech becomes a mouth, first of all, it's a thing that's associated with a mouth. Once it becomes a mouth, then it sort of it's meshing its own quality with the thing that creates it. So and again, I think that's commenting on the very first stanza here, where we're getting the meshing of the identity of the self and the you of the one who's loved. So yes, there's a circularity in poetry as well as in prose, where we kind of come back, and many of you are going to be more familiar with writing academic essays. And probably your professor or teachers earlier on in high school have told you that at the end of an essay, you're circling back to your beginning to some degree, right? So you have your thesis and your introduction, and in the end of the essay, you're circling back to that thesis and concluding it and bringing a new idea to it, right? So poetry kind of does the same thing as does prose, right? There's a circularity there. We're at some level hearkening back to the beginning. And that creates the finality, and that's how you know where to end a poem or to end a story, a short story. Okay. So this is not an easy poem in that it's not the kind of poem you're probably most familiar with, but because lineage, right, where you break lines, is so important in poetry, and this is a really good example of selecting line breaks, where to break lines. And because it is included in the article I've asked you to read, I thought this would be a good poem to begin with. Don't worry about getting poetry, okay? And even Robert Creeley talks about that, right? It's not that you have to, there's some magic that you have to unlock in a poem, and then, oh, you're going to understand everything that's being said. Let yourself sort of go with it, right? The way that you might let yourself go with music. Let yourself kind of ride along with it, and take from it what you can, and part of the purpose of this class is for you to start to recognize why poets make certain decisions and choices. And that's exactly what you're going to be doing as well as you make your own decisions and choices around poetry. So if you'll see, none of these lines has an end stop. An end stop would be some sort of punctuation, like a period or a comma at the end of the line. This is called a caesura. This comma here after hurt, that's a caesura. It is a pause in the middle of the line, but we have no end stops. Here's another caesura, right? We get a period, so you're pausing for a little longer. We get no end stops till we get down to here, say everything. And then we go on to this next stanza, I love you again. And here's another end stop, right? I love you again, as though it's its own little statement in here. Okay, so I'm gonna stop here, and let's see, I'm gonna stop share there. Okay, I'm gonna stop here with today's look at this poem. And as you continue to read poetry, I really want you to focus on line breaks, and where you're going to be thinking about lineage. Okay, you're going to be thinking about where the lines break. You're going to be thinking about end stopped lines, so why a poet might use punctuation at the end of a line, or enjambment, and that's when the poet excuse me, uses no punctuation, so it goes on to the next line. And and caesura, okay, where a poet, as you saw with Robert Creeley, breaks in the middle of a line, has a punctuation, and how that affects your reading of the poem. All right. And as you go into making your own choices around lineage, I want you to think about that too. Why would you stop here, stop a line here? Why would you use caesura? Why would you use enjambment? How is it affecting the rhythm of your poem?